I'm surprised that I've never made this video. Genshin Impact's lore state is in one of the weirdest predicaments, all because of the word change. Now, I'm not asking for a revolution or an intervention. I'm just here to explain what makes Genshin's lore state so unique compared to other games. Genshin's lore is very different as opposed to something like Undertale, Final Fantasy, Dark Souls, and other RPGs that are already considered as published games. And it's interesting to see the comparisons between a game that's constantly being updated, hence the story is constantly being updated, versus an already established game whose lore is complete and is just waiting for the players to find it. And given the speed of Genshin's updates, as opposed to DLCs that are released in months or years of publication for other games, the lore of the story can get really perplexing at times. Genshin's lore is hidden away in artifacts, archives, books, character stories, and cryptic dialogue, which make it difficult for casual players to look for. So the main Archon quests are meant to present those lore in a more condensed and digestible light. But if I had to summarize the Genshin lore state in general, it's intentionally dynamic, vague, and unreliable. Let's begin with dynamic. There's nothing wrong with having a story constantly being updated, and I even think it spices up the lore a lot. But there are repercussions. Every bit of lore in Genshin is interconnected and can change or even be recontextualized in future patches. This means that if you can't keep up with the lore now, chances are you'll miss important hints and contexts. What may seem as a throwaway piece of history could be connected to some of the biggest players in the story. The concept of Genshin is that everyone is a work in progress. All the characters are going through their own form of development and are embarking on their own journeys. An interview in March 2020 said that the game was meant to feel like everyone is a main character, and the Traveler is just one of many stories. We see this through the character story quests and the character stories in their profiles. In terms of writing, this is very different from something like Persona, where all the characters have to reach their maximum potential or finish their character arc by the end of the game because the game is over. Genshin doesn't have that innate restriction as of now, and you can see the characters develop in real time. For example, A's story underwent multiple arcs in the span of 2.0 to 2.5. She went from an authority figure, a dictator that didn't allow Inazuma to progress under the pretense of preserving eternity, to her realizing the errors of her ways and abolishing the very decree that she thought was just and right. And before someone says that this was the Shogun's idea, we shouldn't consider A as completely innocent either. And she doesn't consider herself as innocent, hence character development. Genshin's characters are meant to grow and develop over time, and they're meant to interact with new experiences like festivals and events. But while that's great for the characters since they develop, lore world building being dynamic can have its own form of consequences. On one hand, you have exploration, but on the other, you have inconsistencies and difficulties of establishing a proper narrative. Genshin's lore makes it so that a video presented right now for its world building could be obsolete in a few months or even in the next patch. In my opinion though, while this seems like a bad thing for content creators, it means that we as an audience need to be critical with what could be misinformation and what could just be seeds planted for a bigger narrative. This is why theories are so rampant in Genshin. It's because there's always new lore content in patches and the story is constantly growing. A great example of the narrative change in Genshin is about the visions. It was a popular idea that the Archons had a hand in giving out the visions. This is because of dialogue from Klee, Bennett, and mostly the human characters perceiving it as a blessing from a god. It was also somewhat cemented by the fact that Venti was the first person to share about the information of the visions being tools for ascension. But in 2.1, we get a hint that the Archons might not be the ones that are dealing with the visions, but instead something even greater. This is even supported with what Zhongli says in the past about visions. Now, here's the real question. That dialogue was said by A. A isn't the original Electro Archon, so who are we to say that she has the full context of what visions even are? One criticism I do have in this game's lore state though is that massive events are time-gated, meaning that the main focus of every patch is changing, and if you don't play the event for that patch, you're gone. The lore would just leave you behind, and there's no real way for you to return to that crucial information unless you watch YouTube videos. And even then, like I said, even YouTube videos can become obsolete in a few patches. Another part of Genshin's lore is that it's vague. Have you ever considered why there are so many theorists in this game? Well, it's because the lore is written in the most cryptic ways I've ever seen in a video game. The way this game does its lore is that it barely confirms anything. Artifact lore is fragmented and just presents snippets of history instead of a full narrative. Sometimes names are completely removed entirely, making the identity of a speaker up for question, or full-on words aren't contextualized whatsoever. The point is that Genshin lore is unfortunately always up for interpretation. Even when you think something is confirmed, the way it's written makes you question if it's actually confirmed or you're just interpreting it in a specific way. The best example of this is character dialogue, where they don't actually talk like a human being. They speak like a character monologuing to a mirror and spouting exposition. Honestly, if I was a traveler, I'd probably just nod along. No wonder the traveler doesn't speak much. Everyone's speaking like they're on a thesis defense. Though, on a more lore-ish side, Genshin doesn't downright confirm anything. The beauty of Genshin lore is that even the characters have no idea what's real, making it the audience's job to be critical with who they think is telling the truth and who is lying. Which brings me to the last characteristic of Genshin lore. It's unreliable. Genshin's lore is never usually written from a third-person omniscient, meaning everything in the lore is written in the context of someone's perspective. There isn't a confirmed body of knowledge. You would think that the artifact lore, a body of information that's supposed to be unbiased and just talks about history, would be a reliable and declarative form of information, when it's not. Dialogue from characters are tainted with personal bias and beliefs. Books in the game sometimes hint that the author themselves don't have the full context, or even straight up lore in the archives are inconsistent and change over time. A good example of this was the Surpassing Cup. Artifact lore written from the perspective of a character should never be considered as true unbiased lore. The Surpassing Cup is Scaramouche's story in which he feels like he was abandoned like worthless dross, but A says that she feels like she owes him something. The people that were talking to Kunikuzushi about A as his creator says that the Electro Archon expressed a form of benevolence to his existence and that it was mercy that she didn't kill him. But in the end, Scaramouche still feels like worthless dross, hence tainting the Surpassing Cup as a third-person limited. Okay, so what's another one? Well, let's go to the fall of Conria. We know that an alchemist's gold was the reason for its downfall because, according to the breeze amidst the forest, gold was a sinner and was corrupted by her own ambition and greed, which prompted for gold to destroy the dynasty, as said by the self-proclaimed prophet in Dainsleif's story. But how reliable really is the book? If we look at the way Conria presents itself in the world, it has militaristic weapons scattered across Tevat, and they were even trying to challenge Celestia's authenticity by challenging their origins. Reality is difficult to pinpoint in Genshin's story. Something that's in a book or in an artifact set may not even be real, and what a character says might be completely misinformed. And I think that's the beauty of Genshin lore. There will always be problem to Genshin's execution story-wise, but the presence of these three characteristics means that the story is never stagnant. Everything is changing and everything is mysterious. We never can predict what's going to happen in the story. As a theorist, I know this might seem counterproductive, but this is the beauty of mystery and why we theorize in the first place. We want to know what we don't know. If I ever have to warn someone about Genshin lore, this is what I'll tell them. You'll never understand it in one sitting. You won't even have all the puzzle pieces to understand the basics of the bigger plot. Genshin's lore is so extensive, so colorful, that the full context of it all is just missing to us right now in the current state of the game. So take your time, read in your own pace, understand in your own pace. If you don't like lore, it's understandable. I skip dialogue all the time. But if you do, then I wish you the best of luck. And for anyone on this channel, always try to fit the pieces yourselves. The word of a content creator, and heck, even the game's archives, are never set in stone. So you should be critical and observant when you read this lore. Because hot diggity, it's a doozy. My name is Aster, and thank you for chilling with me.